Dr. Karen O'Brien, and I would like to use the opportunity to reinforce your message, dear Karen, with my own words. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of politics? Take a moment to ponder, observe what comes up. Maybe it has changed after Karen's talk, I hope so. Any thoughts, feelings, emotions, images, experiences? And then I would like to invite you to please turn to your neighbor and share one or two things with them until I ring the gong. We have practiced that yesterday. So, who thought of something positive? Very few. Who thought of something negative? Almost everyone. Neutral or somewhere in between? Who thought of wholeness? One person. Who rather thought of division? Okay, can we have a screenshot of the room, of the answers? Who thinks that politics will sooner or later solve our problems in a sustainable way? Nobody. Oh, your definition of. Who would like to see politics turn more integral, for example, by including practices as the one we had last night? Great. So that's a good starting point. In this case, you might not like my next question that we heard before. Do you think of yourself as a political person? Aristotle called the human the zoon political. One hand up if you think of yourself as political. Two hands up if you are politically engaged. Not even half of the room, so no hand up if you say it's none of my business or I don't care or have other things to do. So there's a polarity in the room here. And finally, I have a more reflective question just for yourself. When was the last time you had a friendly and meaningful conversation with a person that did not share your views on an important issue? And I don't mean where to go on holidays and your partner or something like that. So somebody from the other end of the political spectrum or somebody who really triggers you. Do you choose to have such conversations every now and then as a way to expand yourself toward more wholeness? Or do you prefer to remain in your bubble and talk to people who share your views? And don't worry if the answer is yes, you're in a lot of good company. There's shadow everywhere. My main message for today is that integral has not only all it needs, it has more than it needs to bring wholeness to politics, but surfing those polarities out there and the challenges around that is a skill, a practice, and an art that we have to actively decide to engage in and to make space for. And we might have to learn to do it by falling and by failing our way forward. So how can we bring more wholeness to politics and learn to serve those polarities? As a social and political scientist, I spent many years exploring the conditions and threats for good politics, which means, well, some of it is liberal democracy, and also to study the obstacles for liberal democracy to take root in formerly non-democratic countries. For instance, in Eastern Europe, I started my studies in the 1990s. Why? Because back then, after the end of the Cold War, my deepest driver and motivation was lasting peace and well-being in Europe. And the assumption was that the higher the degree of self-determination and freedom, the better the basis for long-term thriving. In addition, as a German, it was crystal clear to me from the start, and I deepened that in my studies, that the quality of democracy is a function not just of certain institutions, lower right quadrant, but of the willingness of a society to accept and embrace these institutions in everyday life, which is all the other quadrants. And this is at least partly a function of the depth and the decidedness and, the strength with which a society comes to terms with the shadows and trauma of past experience that are not democratic, and that's especially the inner quadrants, lower left. So this urge for deep and lasting peace and thriving in Europe caused me to study Russia. And it's over 7 decades, and actually it's much more, of non-democratic experience, and the many ways in which post-Soviet Russian politics and society chose and chooses every day to not confront and come to terms with the legacies, the guilt, and the trauma of its past. And the consequences of this are crystal clear today. A repetition of Soviet-style violent and imperialist habits and behaviors, which is not surprising from an integral and a psychological point of view, yet it apparently took Western politics completely by surprise. So, as a result of this personal experience of surfing those quadrants of transformation and the polarities between the science of democracy on the one hand and the huge empirical knowledge and legacies about the Soviet system in post-Soviet Russia, I developed kind of my own understanding of what deep transformation in 4 quadrants looks like, way before I discovered integral theory. What if we had a politics that included these deep and subtle dimensions by design, and that was able to detect such incoherences before things escalate into war and large-scale destruction? My agenda for this talk today is to surf through questions, so to speak. The first question is maybe banal. Why do we need integral politics today? The second one is, what could it look like to bring more wholeness to politics? What is integral politics, or how could we define it? And as a kind of overarching meta question throughout the talk, the famous so what question, who cares, right? Why does it need this talk on this stage? And how does it what does it imply for us here as this community? So why do we need integral politics? And likely some obvious answers. The world is burning as a result of our previous and current ways of doing things, and it is craving for healing and for connection. And the politics we know, essentially modern, competitive, partisan, what we call politics as usual, is not only not prepared to take on the task, but as in other areas, modern consciousness is actually becoming part of the problem more than the solution. And that's not an accusation, it's an observation, because we all know that each stage has its merits and its shadow. So the first challenge that has been mentioned by Karen and others, climate change, clearly a global planetary challenge and clearly the result of modern materialistic lifestyle and values, mainly in Western countries, and it's clearly in need of urgent, immediate, profound, and long-term solutions by humanity as a whole. Do we know what to do against it? Yes. Are we doing it? Well, future generations were screaming yesterday for a very long time. The second challenge, an increase of violent conflicts that tie up many of our focus and resources. And this is increasing and has been increasing considerably over the last years, with modern tools and weaponry making the consequences of these conflicts ever more painful and devastating. A third challenge, liberal democracy as the most progressive system of governance that is currently around, that is currently enacted in many places, is threatened around the globe, both from inside and outside. It doesn't mean that it's the best system, but it's the best system that we have, so to speak. More and more countries turn to authoritarian rules, and subject to further exploration, some of this regression can be explained as a result of our democracies, of our modern democracies being stuck in these modern or even mean green postmodern operating systems that are unable to address the challenges that we find out there in adequate ways. And Bensi has already mentioned yesterday this book by Ken Wilber on Trump's first election from 2017, which claims that Trump's first election was a necessary step backwards of, quote, evolution trying to self-correct the damage that green sociocultural mainstream had produced by ignoring developmental differences, essentially, and by treating traditional values with an arrogant kind of attitude. So this is a very recommended reading in this regard. And Bensi framed this a little bit as a pattern of nature, right? Going up and down. You can see it that way, but I prefer to see regression as human-made. And to look at it in this way, because this shows up our responsibilities for these developments, and it also shows that we have the power to act more wisely and to make better choices, as Karen has just explained with her fractal approach. And also because, yeah, that's this one example for this human-madeness is the fourth challenge, the socioeconomic inequalities that are behind this polarized divide in many countries, a legitimate frustration about these severe inequalities almost everywhere. And they are also a collateral damage of modern extractive economy, human-made, not a law of nature, with disproportionate fortunes piling up in the hands of few people that increasingly undermine social coherence, democracy, and peace. And I could recommend two very inspiring books by the founder of Integral Politics Switzerland, Gilles Ducommun, on the issue of integral political economy, but they are in German, so for those of you who are able to read that. And the list could go on. Almost 50 years ago, Claire Graves, whom you know, said in a lecture, "There is no need to worry if integral takes over." You're laughing. 50 years ago, and there were some problems back then as well. Because as you all know, in order to fix the problems that one type of thinking has produced, it needs a new, more complex paradigm of thinking and of doing things, and integral provides just that. It provides the big picture that allows to see where our systems are not running smoothly anymore and where they are even becoming dysfunctional. At the same time, and that's the fifth challenge that I would like to mention here, the field of transformative integral postmodern change makers, while it is growing, is still quite small, it's quite dispersed and quite scattered, or in the terminology of our Cohere project that we've also been presenting here, it's incoherent, which means that it's still not speaking with one voice, and this is the reason why it's still not in its full power. And this is partly due to the close character of our current orange political systems, which essentially allow access to power only to political parties and not the collective intelligence of the people, of the citizens. But what if this incoherence was also in us? And at least partly due to us integralists, self-declared leading edge. Why is it so hard to implement something that we know for sure could solve all our problems? If integral is so needed, why is it not more widespread in the public space, but still more of a subculture or bubble? What does it need to put integral into a mainstream, and why does it need this talk here on this stage? 50 years after Graves' quote that I just cited, and over 30 years after the dawn of Ken Wilber's integral theory, which gave rise to a huge movement of, I don't know, but probably millions of followers worldwide. But so far, only one integral political project that I know of, at least, in Switzerland. The idea of integral politics has been around for over 100 years, and it dates back to this guy here, Sri Aurobindo, the Indian mystic and politician, and who, by the way, also was the first source of inspiration of Ken Wilber. And for Aurobindo, integral was actually a political vision. He called the vision of, the vision of human unity. Chapter 1 in my book outside. So where did the political go in the integral movement? Politics is the area where our most important decisions are taken. Yet it seems to be the last sector that opens up to integral ideas and practices. Is this the fault of that system, of the orange system of politics? I would say that this system simply does its job to preserve itself, producing more of the same results: division, compromise, short-term fixes, and including all the collateral damage that I mentioned earlier. The real problem beside all this damage is that this system is unable to see itself and the damage, the collateral damage it produces, because it lacks the meta perspective. But what about us, integralists? Given our meta perspective, are we seeing this? Are we doing what we should be doing if we see it? What are we not doing that we should be doing? Are we using our meta perspective in responsible ways? Or do we prefer to see ourselves as private integralists rather than political beings? As great integral entrepreneurs with next stage consciousness, expertise, models, and all the rest of it, outcompeting each other for airtime, clients, and orders. Has integral been hijacked by orange here? And I learned that a keynote should be provocative. So, as the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is the eating. Or as we learned yesterday, the concept of a dog does not bite. In other words, integral is only integral if we walk our talk. Clare Graves did not say, no need to worry if integral talks or explains the world or celebrates itself. He said, no need to worry if integral takes leadership. And it reminds the dilemma of climate change that we just heard about. Almost everyone knows about it, theoretically. Many even know what should or could be done about it precisely, but most people remain with their habitual ways of life. Because serious transformation can be rather painful, it can be rather uncomfortable. It means to let go of certain things, it means to roll up your sleeve and to, we've heard this before, to wake up, to grow up, to clean up, not just as a name in itself, but then in order to show up and to speak up with what needs to be said. And this in turn might imply to make yourself unpopular, to make yourself vulnerable, by speaking up with ideas that are by definition unconventional, minority positions, It might even imply to fail, to ridicule yourself, to make mistakes, or as this guy says, Arnold Mindell, the founder of Deep Democracy that I work with a lot, it might mean to stand in the fire of tension, of adversary, and it might hurt, yet this is what life and what the world is calling for. So what does it imply for integral as a new paradigm to take over in politics? The short answer is paradigmatic change is always transformation in all quadrants. So what does that mean? What is integral politics? And my understanding can be framed in 3 ways, let's say. One is a short definition, one is a simple but magic definition, and the third one is a more detailed description of all the different aspects of it for informed audiences like you guys here. So the short definition is what we came up with in our last Lift Politics project, describing the new paradigm in these 3 words, essentially. It is deeper, it is wider, and it is longer, meaning that it is more expansive in all of these 3 vectors, inner, outer, and time, and this in a way that is lighter, more agile, and more playful. And this leads me to the magic definition. The magic definition is that you can, if you do it right, that you can sense it and feel it in your body. And you sense it immediately when you walk into a room. And people in integral politics workshops that we hold repeatedly report that they feel more alive, more connected, reconnected to some deeper sense of purpose and to their soul, maybe, and to joy. And the more scientific explanation of this is that if we do integral politics, and design it into the ways we do workshops, we're building and we're deepening this quality of coherence in social fields that people can immediately sense whether or not they have any idea of the theory behind. And we hope to demonstrate some of that later in our workshop. And the third, more detailed description is the result, so to speak, of this book, which goes through the 10 of the most, let's say, important inspirational thinkers of integral politics, from Aurobindo to Karen O'Brien's quantum approach to politics. And I have tried to condense those inspirations into 10 principles that you can download via this QR code if you scroll down a little bit. And I have divided them into 5 and 5. The first 5 are substantial paradigmatic principles, which really describe the new quality of what this paradigm looks like and feels like, essentially. And the second row of 5 principles are more the principles of implementation and application. And every single one of them brings more wholeness to politics, but the challenge is, of course, to build up the whole wave, right? Riding the wave of those 10 principles. And if one of these is missing, the whole wave might collapse. So I'm not saying that this is the ultimate definition of integral politics. It's my best working definition after about 25 years of working on the issue. It's not a cookbook. It's not a recipe that you can simply download, that you cannot plug and play it and just apply it wherever. But that has to do with the fact that every society where something new is implemented for the first time, people need to implement it in their own way. They have to fail it into being, so to speak, in their way, and the very society where it's going to happen needs to do it. And so this is why integral sort of needs to take a different flavor in every context where it's implemented. And of course, there are tensions between those principles, and the art of integral politics is precisely this aperspectival attitude that allows us to serve those polarities bring them into a productive conversation and dance like a tango. We heard that yesterday. Right, so what does this imply in practice? And I'd like to zoom into just the first of those 10 principles. It's the most basic principle. In including more perspectives. Sounds quite banal, it sounds banal, but the devil is, as always, in the detail. How do we implement this, and how do we make sure that all perspectives are integrated, that all voices are heard? In the conventional modern paradigm that you see here, the approach is quite quantitative, counting formally equal votes. And by the way, this has been an evolving concept from only certain men, especially rich men or aristocratic men, to then all men over 21, then over 18, then everybody over 18. And nowadays we're already talking about giving the right to vote to future generations, children, plants and animals and so on. So democracy is an evolving concept, but that's the modern version of it. Eventually, postmodern Green has voiced legitimate critique of this formal approach for ignoring minorities, disadvantaged groups of all kind, and for primarily hearing those voices that have the means to make themselves heard, a question of power. So diversity programs appeared, minorities were given social rights, etc., etc. That's about where we stand today. Has it solved the crisis of democracy? Well, why is there still so much frustration around democracy from people who don't feel heard? What is missing in this quantitative approach? The first principle of integral politics is all about going deeper beyond those quantitative concepts of equality and justice. It goes beyond the modern and the postmodern approaches to expand democracy quantitatively towards deepening it. And its ideal is a listening society. You might have come across that term by Hansi Freinacht, the meta-modern political philosopher, which actively seeks and intuits sometimes what are actually the relevant perspectives that might not be at the table yet and that are missing and that we need to include. And to intuit this, we need to use not just the intelligence of our head, but also the intelligence of our heart. And one way, the head way of doing it is, so to speak, the four quadrants, or one head way of doing this. For example, asking, did we consider all those qualities that are less easy to measure, the inner dimensions, feelings, sensitivities, beliefs, and opinions that people hold but sometimes do not voice out of fear of all kinds, fear of negative judgments maybe, stigmatization, or some more or less subtle social sanctions. This is a huge problem for democracy, and we talked about it 2 days ago in the Deep Democracy workshop, where I showed this graph also. For Germany, where we have today a majority of people, of citizens, who think it is better to, quote, be careful rather than voice your opinion openly in the public. And this holds true for supporters of all parties, not of all parties, not just the right wing, except for the Greens. Surprise, surprise. Paradoxically, green narratives of tolerance and diversity are dominating public discourse here and silencing the majority of the rest. And this is actually a similar phenomenon to what brought Trump to office in the United States. So what's the problem with this? Perspectives that are not heard or not even voiced not only remain invisible in mainstream politics, they also generate toxic dynamics. Large numbers of people who don't speak up anymore start to undermine politics and democracy at some point, and they begin to show various forms of resistance. It can be from covered to open. I showed that also 2 days ago. It's a deep democracy resistance line that helps us to detect, is there any resistance in social fields? And this should be a wake-up call if we detect such resistance. And it can go to voting extremist parties, and it can go even further. And this is where modern democracies often get stuck. And the more they get stuck, the more resistance grows, to the point where, as deep democracy holds, a fellow citizen who has not been heard can turn into a terrorist. And the mainstream approach here in Germany, at least, is often to exclude the troublemaker, the right-wing people, right, and build firewalls, etc., instead of deep listening. So how can we detect tensions and dissolve the underlying resistance before it escalates? And there would be many things to say about this, what listening more deeply means. And ideally, we should be designing deep listening into all quadrants of our political system, of our political operating system. And so you see this has many dimensions, and one book that is, that the cover is there in the slide, has just come out in the German-speaking area with many, many suggestions for how we could update our lower right quadrant in terms of new institutions for deeper listening. But I will focus here mainly on the political culture part, because that's what concerns us here more. So how good are we really at listening to opposing views, at listening to criticism, at welcoming bad news, welcoming resistance? And this is the hard way, right? To stand in the tension of the no and of the resistance and stand in the fire without burning, just holding it. In our current project called Cohere Plus, we explore a quality called coherence, which essentially means a deep alignment in collective fields and the factors which support it, because we think that coherence allows us to be more internally clear, clean and focused, and hence more able to act effectively. And we found that coherence is a function of various factors, but essentially also the degree of openness in dealing with inside tension and conflict in the social field, the inner work of cleaning up. And there's a quote by Arnold Mindell that I like. He says, "Conflict is the best way to community." So I see that my time is up. So I go through this very quickly. You have two poles here in this model. So we can ask ourselves, where are we and our society on this model? We seem to be quite in the middle, and the question is, how can we bring it more to the coherence pole? And what I use a lot is deep democracy for surfing deeper into what they frame as being below the waterline, right? All the difficult material, such as trauma, abuse, difficult emotions, etc., and they frame it as being the potential that we need to harvest in order to improve the quality of connection in our communities. And we do a lot of this work in all sorts of dialogue formats, roundtables, etc., etc., and we need this out there everywhere as soon as we can. So I will close with 3 questions for you. The first question is, who has some experience with personal transformation, be it individual, collective, holding tensions in groups? Many people, almost everyone, that's great. The second question is the same question as before. Do you see yourself as political or politically engaged? Okay, still a big polarity in the room. So we have all it needs, but do we feel responsible? In our recent colloquium on deep democracy and power, this is the last claim here, one definition of the abuse of power was not to make use of the power and the possibilities we have and to remain silent in view of big challenges. So the last question, main message again, we have all it needs, but do we choose to engage and use it? The last question is, would you mind revising the identity of not being political with a more integral definition of politics in mind? And if you become slightly nervous now, that's great, because there could be a calling in this for you. There could be a growth edge, because something very serious is at stake. Namely the question, are we able to take democracy to the next level, some form of integral governance, or are we going to lose it altogether? So I would say that we integralists have a fucking responsibility to show up, to step up, and to take leadership, by facilitating these spaces that we need in society, for society to see itself, to reflect itself, to feel and to mourn the pain and the damage that the previous paradigm has caused, to take it through the U, and then in order to create more integral ways of democracy. And I hope sincerely that nobody leaves this room here today without a specific idea of where you could put your skills and your wisdom in service of this, and without a commitment to at least give it a try. And the good news is it can be fun and it can be very easy to walk the talk of changing the paradigm. And as a proof of concept, I invite you to stand up and to launch an integral rocket as confirmation. And the rocket is a German pattern. It has 5 steps. The first step is to clap. The second stage is to turn to your neighbor and tap them on their back. Turn to your neighbor, clap on your neighbor's back. The third stage is to tap your thighs. The fourth step is to stamp with your feet and to start the rocket. Make some noise. And the fifth stage, woo! So no need to worry if Integral finally decides to take over. Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you in our workshop for more inspiration and next steps.